Human lets the injured alien girl ride his horse, and the alien girl says the horse remembers her past life. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. John Walker had always lived a quiet life in the small town of Willowbrook, a place where everyone knew everyone, and not much ever changed. As a local horse trainer, John spent his days tending to his horses, fixing fences, and helping his neighbors. The simple life was all he ever wanted. But on this particular day, as he rode through the dense woods surrounding his ranch, he never expected his world to be turned upside down. It was a crisp autumn morning, the air cool with a slight breeze, as John led his horse, Shadow, along the familiar trail. He had just passed the old oak tree when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw it clearly, a figure, lying motionless on the forest floor. Without thinking, John dismounted and hurried over to the figure. As he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, or at least, that's what she appeared to be. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair shimmered in the sunlight, a silvery hue that didn't look quite human. She was breathing, but weakly. John knelt beside her, unsure of what to do. She had deep cuts on her arms and a strange glow in her eyes. He gently shook her shoulder, trying to rouse her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but concerned. The girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. At first, they were unfocused, but as she looked at him, a strange recognition flashed across her face. You're human," she whispered, her voice trembling. John's heart raced. "Yeah, I am. What happened to you? Where did you come from?" The girl shook her head, as if struggling to remember. I don't know. I was on a mission. Something went wrong." She winced in pain, trying to sit up, but John quickly supported her. "You're hurt. I need to get you to safety." He helped her to her feet, supporting her as they slowly made their way back to his ranch. When they arrived, John carefully laid her down on a couch inside his cabin and went to work tending to her wounds. As he cleaned her cuts, the girl stared out the window, her mind clearly elsewhere. After a few moments of silence, she spoke again. "Your horse. Shadow, right?" John looked up in surprise. "Yeah, that's him." "How do you know that?" The girl's eyes seemed to focus on something distant, as if she were seeing something that wasn't there. "I know him," she said quietly. "In another life. I knew him." John frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean, another life?" The girl paused, as if gathering her thoughts. "I don't fully understand it, but I think the horse remembers me. I think he remembers his past life." John stared at her in disbelief, unsure whether to take her words seriously. But the intensity in her eyes made him feel like there was more to this than he could comprehend. He decided to let her rest for now and figure things out later. Little did he know, this encounter would change his life, and the life of Shadow, forever. The next few days passed in a blur for John. He continued his usual routine, but his mind often wandered back to the strange girl he had found in the woods. Isla, she had introduced herself as. Despite her unusual appearance and the mysterious way she spoke, something about her felt familiar. He had made sure she was comfortable in the cabin, and every day, he took care of her injuries, watching as she slowly regained strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Isla seemed more alert than usual. She was sitting near the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of trees and hills that surrounded John's ranch. John walked in, carrying a tray of food, and set it down on the table in front of her. "You're up early today," he said with a smile, trying to keep the mood light. Isla turned her head slightly, her silvery eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking," she replied softly. John sat down across from her, intrigued. "About what?" Isla's gaze seemed to drift, as though she were looking at something far beyond the cabin walls. "About Shadow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's more than just a horse, isn't he?" John raised an eyebrow, taken aback by her statement. "What do you mean?" Isla looked at him seriously, her expression intense. "I can feel it. There's something about him, something ancient. He's not just a regular horse. He has memories, memories from a past life." John was silent for a moment. He had been skeptical at first, but after seeing how Isla seemed to connect with Shadow in ways that didn't make sense, he was beginning to wonder if there was more truth to her words than he'd initially thought. "You really believe that?" he asked. Isla nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "I do. When I touched him, I felt it, a connection. It's like he knows me. And I know him, too. From a time long ago." John swallowed hard, unsure of how to process this information. He had grown up with Shadow, a horse that had been with him since he was a young boy. Shadow had always been a special horse, fast, strong, and seemingly wise beyond his years, but John had never considered that there might be something supernatural about him. "I don't know what to say," John finally admitted. "But you're sure about this?" Isla hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'm not sure of everything. But I know there's a deeper story here, one that's connected to me and Shadow. Maybe I was meant to find him. To help him remember." The room fell silent as John processed her words. He looked at Isla, wondering who she really was and what kind of life she had lived before this one. But for now, all he could do was trust her, and listen to the strange but compelling story she was beginning to tell. As the night grew darker, the only sounds in the room were the soft rustling of the wind outside and the steady rhythm of Shadow's hooves as he grazed outside. A sense of unease settled over John. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew that whatever was happening with Isla and Shadow, it was only the beginning. The days that followed brought a sense of calm, but also an undercurrent of unease. John couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfolding around him, something far bigger than he could comprehend. Isla seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, and while she rested often, she was always awake just before dusk, staring out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. One evening, as John was finishing up his work in the barn, Isla walked out to meet him, her steps deliberate and steady. She had been quiet all day, and John could tell she was ready to talk. "John," she called, her voice clear and strong. He turned to see her standing at the edge of the barn, looking at him with a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," she continued, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "I know you're confused. You want to understand why I'm here and what this all means." John wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over to her, sensing that she was about to reveal something important. "I've been trying to figure that out myself," he admitted. "But I don't know what to believe. What is all this about Shadow? And why do you keep saying he remembers you?" Isla nodded slowly, as if she had been preparing for this moment. "I told you before that I knew Shadow. But it's more than that. He's been with me in previous lives, in different forms, and I've always known him." John's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "You mean, like reincarnation?" Isla smiled softly, a distant look in her eyes. "Not exactly. It's more than that. There's a connection between me and Shadow that goes beyond time. In each life, we're drawn to each other, even if we don't remember it at first." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But this time, it's different. This time, we have a purpose. Shadow needs to remember who he really is, and I need to help him." John was silent for a moment, processing her words. He had always thought of Shadow as just a horse, a companion he had grown up with, but Isla's words were making him question everything. So, you think he has some kind of past life? That he's been reincarnated? Isla nodded again, her expression serious. Yes, and I believe it's tied to something bigger. Something that happened long ago, something that neither of us fully understands yet. But I know this, Shadow's memories hold the key to everything. John looked over at Shadow, who was grazing peacefully in the pasture, his mane blowing gently in the wind. The horse looked content, as if he had no care in the world. But John could sense the truth in Isla's words. There was something about Shadow, something deeper, that he had never fully understood. I don't know how I feel about all this, John said finally, his voice filled with uncertainty. But I trust you, Isla. I'll help you however I can. Isla's face softened with gratitude. Thank you, John. You don't know how much that means to me. She took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. We need to take the next step. Shadow needs to remember, and I need to help him unlock those memories. It's the only way to set things right. John nodded, feeling a sense of resolve beginning to take root in him. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could see the urgency in Isla's eyes. He knew, without a doubt, that whatever lay ahead would change their lives, and possibly the fate of the world, forever. The following days were filled with a sense of anticipation as Isla and John worked together to uncover the mystery surrounding Shadow. They spent hours talking, discussing the strange connection Isla felt with the horse, and the cryptic memories she believed he held. As the days passed, Isla's strength continued to grow, and her connection with Shadow seemed to deepen. John, still unsure of what to make of everything, began to feel a growing sense of urgency. It was as if something was drawing them all toward a destination, though he couldn't quite understand what that destination was. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set and the sky turned golden, Isla approached John with a determined look on her face. It's time, she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. John turned to look at her, sensing the gravity of the moment. Time for what? He asked, though he already had an inkling of what she meant. Isla glanced toward the pasture where Shadow stood, his head raised, as if he too understood that something was about to change. It's time for him to remember, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to help him unlock his past. John's heart skipped a beat. How do we do that? Isla nodded, taking a deep breath. I can guide him. But you have to trust me, John. This is the only way. With that, she walked toward the pasture, her footsteps light but purposeful. John hesitated for a moment before following her. When they reached Shadow, Isla stood still for a moment, her eyes closing as if she were concentrating. John watched, unsure of what to expect. There was something almost mystical about the way she moved, as if she were drawing upon a power that he couldn't comprehend. She placed her hand on Shadow's side, her fingers brushing gently against his coat. The horse stood still, his body tense, but his eyes calm. Shadow, Isla whispered, it's time to remember. You've lived many lives, but this one is different. You're not just a horse. You've been something more. John watched in awe as Isla's voice seemed to reverberate through the air. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, slowly, Shadow's eyes seemed to shift, as though something deep within him was awakening. The horse's body relaxed, and he let out a soft, almost reverent breath. John stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder. What's happening? He asked, his voice barely audible. Isla opened her eyes, looking at John with a quiet smile. He's starting to remember, she said softly. John's breath caught in his throat as he watched Shadow's eyes flicker with an intensity that he had never seen before. For a long moment, the world seemed to stand still, and John felt a strange connection to the horse, as if they were all part of something much larger than themselves. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the moment passed. Shadow blinked and snorted, his expression returning to its usual calm demeanor. But something had changed. There was a depth in his gaze now, a hint of something ancient, something far beyond what John could understand. Isla stepped back, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. "He's remembered," she said softly. "But there's more to the story. We have to keep going. There's still so much we don't know." John stood there, staring at the horse, trying to process what had just happened. He had witnessed something he could never have imagined, a glimpse into a past that was beyond his understanding. But he also knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever this journey was, it was only going to get more complicated, and more dangerous. But for now, he had to trust Isla, and trust in the connection that had been forged between them. And, more than anything, he had to trust that they were on the right path. The next few days brought a strange peace to the ranch. John went back to his usual routines, though his mind was constantly on the events that had transpired with Isla and Shadow. There was an undeniable change in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. Shadow seemed different, calmer, more aware, as if he had unlocked something within himself. And Isla, she seemed more at ease now that Shadow had remembered, but there was still an urgency to her presence. One morning, as John was preparing breakfast, Isla approached him with a determined look on her face. "John, we need to go," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. John looked up from the stove, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Go where?" he asked, setting the spatula down. Isla glanced toward the horizon, her eyes focused on something far in the distance. "There's a place. It's where the past lives were forged. Where Shadow's memories, our connection, began." John's heart raced at her words. "How do you know about this place?" Isla's gaze softened, and she took a deep breath before answering. "I don't fully understand it myself. But I feel it, deep inside. I've known about it for years, but I've never been able to find it until now. The time has come." She paused, then added, "It's the only way to fully unlock what's hidden in Shadow's past." John stood up, wiping his hands on a towel. He could see the determination in her eyes, and despite the uncertainty swirling inside him, he knew she was right. There was something important about this place she spoke of. "All right," he said, finally. "Let's go." Isla smiled, a faint trace of relief passing across her face. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the barn, with John following close behind. They saddled up Shadow, and John led the horse out of the barn, feeling a strange pull toward the same direction Isla was heading. As they rode, the familiar landscape of Willowbrook began to shift. The winding roads and dense forests slowly gave way to a more rugged terrain. The air grew thicker, the sky darker, as if the world itself was responding to their journey. Hours passed, and John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being guided by something greater than themselves. Eventually, they reached the foot of a mountain. It was taller than any peak John had seen before, its jagged edges cutting sharply against the sky. Isla stopped, her expression unreadable as she looked at the mountain. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice almost reverent. John felt a chill run down his spine as he looked up at the towering peak. There was something ancient about the place, something both beautiful and foreboding. "What now?" John asked, his voice low. Isla looked at him, her gaze steady. "Now we climb," she said, and with that, she urged Shadow forward, leading the way up the mountain. The climb was steep and challenging, but the further they ascended, the more John felt a sense of purpose. They reached a small plateau near the top of the mountain, where the wind howled fiercely. At the center of the plateau stood a massive stone structure, half buried in the earth, as if it had been there for centuries. The stones were covered in intricate carvings, symbols that John didn't understand, but they seemed to pulse with an energy that made his heart race. Isla dismounted and approached the stone structure, her fingers gently tracing the carvings. "This is where it all began," she whispered, more to herself than to John. "This is where Shadow's past was sealed." John stepped closer, his eyes scanning the symbols. He felt a strange pull, like the stone was calling to him. Isla turned to him, her expression serious. This is where Shadow's true nature will be revealed. It's where everything comes together. John nodded, feeling a mix of awe and fear. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew that the moment they were in was significant. And as they stood there, in the shadow of that ancient stone, John felt the weight of destiny settling over him. Whatever came next, he knew he had to be ready. The wind howled fiercely as Isla and John stood at the edge of the ancient stone structure, the air around them thick with an energy that seemed almost alive. Shadow stood quietly by Isla's side, his mane blowing in the wind, his eyes glowing with an intensity John had never seen before. It was as though the mountain itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Isla reached out, her fingers brushing against the carvings on the stone, her expression one of concentration. The symbols seemed to pulse under her touch, as though they were responding to her presence. John watched, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. He had no idea what was happening, but it was clear that something momentous was taking place. "This is it, John," Isla whispered, her voice steady but filled with reverence. "This is where the past converges with the present. Shadow's memories, our connection, everything, it all starts here." John stepped closer, his eyes drawn to the glowing symbols on the stone. He could feel a strange warmth radiating from them, as though they were inviting him in. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice low, unsure of what role he was supposed to play in this moment. Isla took a deep breath, her eyes closing as she focused. "We wait," she said quietly. "Shadow and I need to connect with the energy here. This is where it all began, and where it will all end." She turned to Shadow, speaking softly to him, her voice filled with a tenderness that John hadn't seen before. Shadow's ears flicked as Isla's words seemed to sink in, and he moved forward, slowly approaching the stone. As he stepped closer, the air around them seemed to shift, and the ground beneath them hummed with a deep, resonant vibration. The stone itself began to glow, the symbols lighting up one by one, as though they were coming to life. John stepped back, watching in awe as the scene before him grew more intense. It was as if the past was stirring, reaching out through the stone, drawing them into something far beyond their understanding. Isla remained still, her eyes closed, her connection with Shadow deepening. John could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the sense that they were on the precipice of something monumental. As Shadow's hooves touched the stone, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the carvings, blinding John for a moment. He shielded his eyes, but the light quickly faded, leaving behind a calm, almost peaceful atmosphere. When John opened his eyes again, he saw Isla standing tall, her hand resting gently on Shadow's back, both of them surrounded by a soft, shimmering light. There was a quiet understanding in Isla's gaze as she looked at John, as though she had unlocked something deep within herself. "It's done," she said softly. "Shadow has remembered. The connection is complete." John felt a surge of emotion, relief flooding his chest. He wasn't entirely sure what had just happened, but it was clear that something important had changed. Shadow no longer seemed like just a horse, there was an ancient wisdom in his eyes, a knowledge that spanned lifetimes. John took a step forward, his heart racing. "What now?" he asked, his voice filled with anticipation. Isla turned to him, her expression calm but filled with purpose. "Now," she said, "we move forward. There's much more to learn, and there's still danger ahead. But Shadow's memories have shown us the way. We're not alone in this." She paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. "We have a purpose now, John. The journey is just beginning." John nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew that he and Isla, and Shadow, were meant to walk this path together. The mountain, the stone, the energy, they were all part of something far larger than anything John could have imagined. And with that, they turned and began their descent, the first steps of a new chapter in their journey unfolding before them. As they made their way down the mountain, the world around them seemed to change with every step. The energy that had surrounded the ancient stone structure still lingered in the air, a subtle hum that made the hairs on the back of John's neck stand on end. Isla walked ahead, her pace steady, her expression focused but calm. Shadow followed close behind, his movements slow but purposeful, as if he were contemplating something profound. John couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It had only been days since he first found Isla, and already, his life had been turned upside down. What had started as a simple act of kindness had led him down a path he never could have imagined. As they reached the base of the mountain, the sky above them was tinged with the colors of dawn, the first light of day breaking through the thick clouds. The air was fresh, crisp, and filled with possibility. But despite the beauty of the morning, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something neither he nor Isla were fully prepared for. "Where do we go now?" John asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Isla paused for a moment, looking out at the horizon as if searching for something only she could see. "There's a place," she said softly, "a place where we can find answers. Where Shadow's past can be fully unlocked. But we can't do it alone. We need to find others." John nodded slowly, trying to process what she had said. "Others?" he repeated. "Who are they?" Isla turned to him, her eyes steady and knowing. "I don't know them yet," she said, "but they are out there. We'll find them, and together, we can uncover the truth." John wasn't sure what truth Isla was referring to, but he trusted her. Over the past few days, he had come to realize that Isla wasn't just some stranger, she was part of something much larger. Something that had been set in motion long before they had met. He glanced at Shadow, who was now standing still, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. The horse seemed to be waiting for something, as if he, too, could sense that the journey was far from over. "How will we find them?" John asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Isla smiled faintly, her expression softening. "The path will show itself," she said. "We just have to be ready to follow it." With that, she turned and began walking, her steps sure and deliberate. John followed her, Shadow trailing behind them, and for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose. The weight of their mission was clear, and although he didn't fully understand everything, he knew that he was on the right path. They continued their journey, leaving behind the mountain and the stone structure, moving toward whatever lay ahead. The land around them grew more open, with rolling hills and fields stretching as far as the eye could see. John couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond the horizon, what answers they would find, and who these mysterious people Isla spoke of were. But one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. The past, the present, and the future were all intertwined in ways he could never have imagined. And as they walked, the world seemed to stretch before them, full of unknowns and untold stories. But John was no longer afraid. He had Isla, and he had Shadow. Together, they would uncover the truth. Together, they would face whatever came next. The journey continued, and the landscape around them shifted once again as they left behind the mountain and the ancient stone structure. Isla, John, and Shadow moved through open fields, the wind whispering through the tall grass as if it were guiding them towards something greater. The sun had risen high in the sky, casting a warm glow on the earth below, and yet, there was still a lingering sense of anticipation in the air. John kept glancing at Isla, his thoughts swirling with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The path ahead remained uncertain, but there was one thing he was sure of, this was no ordinary journey. They were heading towards something important, something that would reveal the truth about Shadow's past, Isla's connection to him, and perhaps even the hidden mysteries of the world itself. As the hours passed, the terrain began to change. The open fields gradually gave way to dense forests, the trees towering overhead, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air grew cooler, and the sound of birdsong filled the silence between them. Isla seemed to move with purpose, as if she knew exactly where they were headed, though John couldn't discern the way. He trusted her completely, but there was a part of him that wondered if they were being led into something they couldn't control. After what felt like an eternity of walking, Isla finally spoke. "We're getting closer," she said, her voice steady and calm. John looked up, seeing a faint glow through the trees in the distance. It was a soft, golden light, unlike anything he had ever seen before. The closer they got, the more intense the light became, until it seemed to fill the entire clearing ahead. As they stepped into the clearing, John's breath caught in his throat. Before them stood a massive tree, its trunk wide and ancient, its branches stretching high into the sky. The tree was unlike anything he had ever seen, its bark shimmered with a silver hue, and the leaves sparkled as though dusted with stardust. At the base of the tree, there was a stone altar, its surface covered in the same strange symbols they had seen earlier, glowing with the same ethereal light. John felt a wave of awe wash over him as he approached the tree, his footsteps hesitant. Isla walked ahead, her eyes locked onto the altar. "This is where we must go," she said softly. "This is where Shadow's past will be fully unlocked." John stood still, unsure of what to do next. The energy in the clearing was palpable, and it was as if the tree itself was watching them, waiting for something. He glanced at Shadow, who was standing quietly beside him, his eyes fixed on the altar. The horse seemed to be waiting as well, as though he knew this was the final step in the journey. Isla turned to John, her expression serious but filled with quiet determination. "We need to perform the ritual," she explained. "This is the place where Shadow's true nature will be revealed. The energy here is ancient, and it will guide us." John swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no idea what this ritual would entail, but he trusted Isla completely. Together, they approached the altar, and Isla began to speak in a language John didn't understand, her voice soft and melodic, as if she were calling upon something deep within the earth itself. As she spoke, the light around them grew brighter, the symbols on the altar glowing with increasing intensity. Shadow stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate, and Isla placed her hand gently on the horse's back. The energy in the air seemed to swell, and John could feel the ground beneath him vibrate with power. A deep, resonant hum filled the clearing, and suddenly, a vision flashed before John's eyes. It was fleeting, but in that moment, he saw glimpses of Shadow's past, visions of the horse in a distant world, standing beside Isla in another life, in another time. The images were fragmented, but they were enough to confirm the connection between Isla, Shadow, and something far greater than he had ever imagined. As quickly as it had come, the vision faded, and John blinked, disoriented. Isla's voice broke the silence. "It's done," she said, her tone filled with quiet triumph. "Shadow's memories have returned." John looked at Shadow, whose eyes now glowed with a deep, ancient wisdom. The horse was no longer just a companion, he was something far more powerful, something that had been a part of Isla and the world for longer than John could comprehend. The journey was far from over, but they had taken a monumental step forward. The truth was unfolding before them, and as they stood in the clearing, the next part of their journey seemed closer than ever. As Isla, John, and Shadow stood in the clearing, the air around them felt charged with a strange energy, the ancient tree before them still glowing faintly. The ritual Isla had performed seemed to have unlocked something profound, a connection between Shadow and the world that was deeper than anything John could have imagined. He stood there, still trying to process everything, watching Shadow's eyes, which now shimmered with knowledge that transcended time. The horse had always been special, but now, he was something more. "What happens next?" John asked quietly, his voice filled with awe and uncertainty. Isla turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. "Now, we seek the others," she said. "The ones who will help us understand what's coming. We've only just begun to uncover the truth, but there is more to find. More than I can explain alone." John nodded, trying to wrap his mind around her words. He had known this journey would lead them somewhere unknown, but now, it seemed as though the path ahead was even more mysterious than he had anticipated. "What do you mean by, the others? Who are they?" Isla looked at him with a faint smile, as if the answer was something he already should have known. They are the ones who will guide us. The ones who have been waiting for this moment, just as we have. They will help us unlock the final pieces of Shadow's past, and perhaps, our future. John felt a shiver run down his spine. The weight of her words was heavy, but there was also a sense of purpose in her voice that made him believe. Despite his doubts, he felt certain of one thing: they were on the right path, and whatever awaited them, they would face it together. "Where do we find them?" he asked. "How do we know where to look?" Isla stepped forward, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "We won't find them in a place. We'll find them in the people we meet. The ones who know what's happening, who can see the signs we've been blind to. It's a matter of trust and patience." She paused, then added, "The world is much bigger than we realize, John. There are forces at play here that even I don't fully understand. But I know that you, me, and Shadow, together, we have a part to play in something much greater." John felt a wave of determination wash over him. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was only the beginning. They had come this far, and now, they would continue. As they turned to leave the clearing, the first rays of the sun broke through the trees, bathing the world in a golden light. The journey ahead was unknown, but one thing was clear: they were not alone. Together, they would uncover the truth and face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as they walked, side by side, John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection, not just to Isla or Shadow, but to something much larger, something that stretched across time and space, guiding them toward their destiny.